Hey guys, we are back updating the power rankings for Australian Survivor Titans versus Rebels following week 1, and this was a very interesting set of episodes that we got here. It certainly did not disappoint, though at the same time, we'll definitely be updating these rankings in a moment here. But there are 24 players to talk about, and let's not waste any more time, let's get right into the video. So starting off at number 24, we have the first boot of the season, and here we have Frankie. And this is probably the worst that a winner pick of mine has ever done on a show that I covered on this channel, where even though my track record for Australian Survivor has been pretty bad compared to other shows, I certainly didn't expect my winner pick here to be the first boot. But that's what happened here. Now within the episode itself, there were definitely some red flags here. For one, she talks about how the tribe has a bunch of leaders, how they don't work together, only for her to then declare that she herself is a leader, given that she normally delegates to others in her day-to-day life. She gets her intro package talking about how she's a salon owner, and I expected this to be a pro for her game, but the show really hypes this up as a more villainous aspect to her. You also have a relationship with Nathan, where she describes him as her puppet, and again, a lot of this just comes off as pretty villainous in my eyes. And by the end of the episode, it was pretty clear that she was going home here, considering that her and the other stronger people were isolating themselves, leaving the more underdoggy figures to come together and blindside her. So again, it made sense why she goes out here within the episode, but if only they actually showcased more of that in the preseason content. I certainly didn't see this coming. But obviously she's now out of the game, so she's here at number 24. Now moving on to number 23, we have the next boot on the board, and here we have Jessica. And this was a bit more expected, as Jessica definitely gave off some pretty bad vibes in the preseason. And to be fair, she was at the bottom initially, where she could have been the first boot there, but it really was the workings of Eden and Mark that caused them to want to protect Jessica. And even moving forward, it did seem at first that they wanted to keep her for that second round and to let her think that she was the one who had saved herself there. But obviously once she started to throw out Eden's name, that kind of forced him to have to turn on her there. So on the whole, it is a pretty bad game. Definitely what I expected from her coming into it. And obviously she is now out of the game as well. So she is here at number 23. Now moving on to number 22, and we have the final boot from this week's episodes. And here we have Peta. And this kind of felt like Frankie, but over on the Rebels side. Again, someone who I was pretty high on coming into the season. And while she didn't get a massive premiere, she did get a confessional during that intro talking about her being a bar manager. And plus you had the talk from Sarah about Peta being included in a solid group. So again, there was some potential there. But obviously she had a pretty big downfall in this latest episode, where she came around looking pretty overconfident. She obviously finds an idol, only for her to get taken out with the idol in her pocket. And again, it is a pretty wonky vote where she came into it thinking that it was a consensus vote, though she also agreed to go along with the split vote plan under the assumption that Kelly had an idol, when in reality she had it the whole time. And I kind of understand why she allowed it to go through, but obviously it just made it easier for the other side to flip the vote on her. And again, it is a largely disappointing run to see her going out this early when she seemed pretty promising in the preseason. But again, she is now out of the game, so she is here at number 22. And with that, there are 21 people left in the game to talk about, and as usual, I'll be ranking them based on how likely I think they are to win the game based on their edit and current game position. But number 21, the person I believe is the least likely to win from this point on, is Scott. And it is a bit of a shame that Scott's here at the bottom, considering he was part of the majority during that first vote. And it's not as if he's playing poorly per se, or at least based off what we've seen. But that's just it. We haven't really seen him at all. He's probably the most invisible person on this cast up to this point. And while there are other people here who have not received a single confessional yet, I feel like Scott is the one who we had the least amount of information on. We don't really know where he stands with anyone. We don't really see him having much conversations with many people. And I feel like with that lack of information, I feel like it's just pretty clear to me that the show is really ignoring him. No, yes, at the same time, there's a chance that he could get more content in the future, as we've seen on Australian Survivor that people can sometimes spike out of nowhere, but I feel like those people very rarely win the game. And I feel like for Scott to have this little of a presence on the show after 3 episodes is such an indictment to me that I have to leave him here at number 21. Now moving on to number 20, and we have someone kind of similar to Scott, but I have them one spot higher, and that person is Tobias. And Tobias is very similar to Scott, where he has 0 confessionals up to this point, and I feel like we very rarely see him on the show. And he's even in the minority now, as we saw his group being blindsided here at this first vote, where obviously Peta was someone he was close to. So obviously that's pretty bad. It was actually a reason why I consider having him below Scott. But the main reason I have him above Scott is we at least have a better understanding of where he is on the tribe, where obviously we saw people like Sarah talking about being close to him. So I feel like that was enough to have him above Scott, though at the same time, I don't see him winning the game from this point, which is why he's here number 20. Now moving on to number 19, and we have someone who definitely got a bit more content here, but was obviously contradicted, and I just don't feel great about them. And here we have Alex. And I did consider having Alex a little bit higher, as he has had a bit more of a consistent presence early on. But I feel like all of his content that I got this week was him wanting to target Kelly, where all of his content in the first 2 episodes is him talking about how great the tribe is, but that Kelly, she's a bit of a nuisance there. And then in episode 3, she was probably one of the biggest people gunning for a Kelly target here, and obviously we know that he was part of the minority group along with Peta, Tobias, and Sarah, and obviously that group is blindsided here. So again, I feel like that's a pretty bad look for Alex, and a big reason why I didn't knock him all the way down, as we're already seeing him on the outs here, so I feel like that's a pretty bad sign. Now I do feel like he has some room to recover here, where I could see him in the next episode starting to pivot a bit more, and him starting to realize that he is at the bottom, but I feel like this rivalry with Kelly could really eat up a lot of his screen time here. I could even see him losing the battle to Kelly if it came down to it, to where he could probably be the next boot of his tribe. So again, there are some worry signs here, which is why he's here at number 19. Now moving on to number 18, and we have someone people were probably expecting to be at the bottom, but I do have them a couple spots higher, and here we have Kelly. And I feel like Kelly has largely lived up to what I expected from her, where she'll be this big, wacky character, and a pretty bad player at that, where we see her being this target during this first tribal, where the cuddle group goes so far as to throw the immunity challenge to get rid of her. And obviously while that backfires, we also see her annoying some of her own allies, where she tries to lay it on too thick by pretending like she's in danger. And again, like a lot of this is pretty wacky and stuff. Again, she's someone who I probably don't think is going to win by the end of it. I could very easily see her being taken out soon, kind of similar to what we saw with Jessica on the other tribe. So again, I'm not saying Kelly's a good player. I'm not saying that she's going to get too far in the game. And she's at least a bigger character than a lot of the people we already talked about, which is why she's here number 18. Now moving on to number 17, and we have another player who I have very little faith in to actually win the game from this point on, even though they didn't get the most quiet at it. But here we have Jaden. And again, Jaden has at least gotten some content here, where in episode 1 he does get a match chat by JLP, where he gets to explain that he feels like he's on the right tribe. Episode 2 he gets a confessional like with Wina, like about finding the idol clue and that he's glad they're on the same page. And then in the latest episode, he talks about how good it is to win the reward, only for the reward to just be a couple cans of food. So again, we are at least seeing more of Jaden on the show than other people we already talked about. But again, I feel like he's clearly being propped up as a bit of a joke on the show, like he's not really being taken that seriously. Even beyond that, he doesn't seem to be in that great of a spot on his tribe, where he was obviously blindsided during that first tribal. And while he's shown having relationships with people like Nathan and Wina, to where obviously Wina does tell him about the idol clue, I feel like the show is kind of dunking on him at the same time, to where I feel like it's pretty unlikely he's going to win by the end of it. So I have him here, number 17. Now moving on to number 16, and we have another player that I feel like the show is kind of dunking on at this point, and it is sadly someone who I was very high on in the preseason, but here we have Nathan. And again, I feel like this first week has been kind of bad for Nathan, where obviously during this first episode, he was blindsided here, where he obviously loses Frankie, though at the same time, Frankie was also talking about him as her puppet, which I feel like doesn't paint him in that great of a light. Episode 2 isn't much better, where he does get a confessional talking about losing Frankie, only for him to note that she's hot, which to me comes off as a little shallow. And then episode 3, he does get a little bit of content, but again, nothing too substantial here. So again, kind of similar to Jaden, I feel like the show is kind of dunking on Nathan a good amount, even though he is getting a somewhat consistent presence, to where I find it unlikely that he's going to win by the end of it. And again, kind of similar to Jaden, he's also not in that good of a spot on his tribe right now, to where I could see him going out soon anyway. So again, I feel like there's a lot of danger spots for Nathan moving forward, but it is that bigger edit that leaves him here number 16. Now moving on to number 15, and we are going back to a string of players who pretty much got no content this week, but are at least shown to be in decent spots. By number 15, we do have Eileen. And again, where is Eileen? Who is Eileen? Again, she doesn't really get much content here. The main reason she's this high on the list is she is shown being the majority group. Again, she does seem to be in a solid spot on her tribe for the time being, but again, it's that complete lack of content in this first week that makes me want to write her off. So she's here number 15. Now moving on to number 14, and we have someone very similar to Eileen, and here we have Kitty. And again, who is Kitty? No confessionals across the episode, not really much of a chance for her to explain herself in any means. However, we do see people talking about her, so where in this latest episode we do know that she is part of this alliance called the Middle-Aged Mafia, along with Mark, Carolyn, and Eden. So again, that's at least something. We do at least know she's in a solid group, but again, the complete lack of content from herself is a big reason she's here number 14. Now moving on to number 13, and we have someone very similar to Kitty, and here we have Caroline. And very similar to Kitty, no confessionals from Caroline this week, which is pretty disappointing. But at the same time, we do know that she's at least within the solid group along with the other older players on the Titans tribe. So at least that's something. And really the main reason she's above Kitty is she did at least get that one scene in episode 2 where she does try to reassure Eden that the votes aren't coming onto him, which I felt like was enough to make her kinda stand out. But again, we still know largely nothing about her, so she's here at number 13. Now moving on to number 12, and we have a player in a very similar ballpark, but at least this player got a confessional. But at number 12, we do have Rihanna. And again, Rihanna's kind of a nobody. We don't really know much about her, though she does at least get a confessional in episode 1 where they first get to camp. She gets that very generic, the experience is amazing confessional. Again, not really saying much here. And she does also have a bit of an interesting role during the vote in episode 3, where she does talk to Kirby about like voting with the Cuddle Club so that they are able to ride the middle. So again, we do kind of know that Rihanna's in a good spot, like she is able to ride the middle with Kirby, though obviously the ramifications for that have yet to be seen. But again, the fact that we know almost nothing about Rihanna herself, and the fact that she doesn't really even comment upon this plan is a pretty big knock against her edit to me, so she's here number 12. Now moving on to number 11, and I wasn't really sure what to do with this person, but based on what we've seen from them so far, it's not looking particularly great. But number 11, we do have Raymond. And again, Raymond doesn't seem to be gelling that well with his tribe, where obviously he was at the bottom early on. People did seem to suspect that he had an idol based off the way that he was behaving. You also have him getting votes at this latest tribal, where obviously he was part of a vote split plan, where had an idol been played, he could have gone home there, which isn't great. But he was part of the majority to take out Peta, so at least that's something. And he does also get some stuff to talk about during the intro where he talks about like how being unorthodox is a second language to him and that interesting people stand out to him. I feel like Raymond is a pretty tough player to assess, as on one hand, he's in a pretty bad spot right now where even though he was part of this majority group, I feel like he's still not in that great of a spot moving forward to where I could see him being an early boot. Though I could also see him popping off like these other under-edited players right now where he could become a more major character down the line. But at the end of the day, I just don't see him as a likely winner either, so I have him here at number 11. Now moving on to number 10, and we have someone kind of like Raymond, but they seem to be in a slightly better spot, and here we have Charles. And I feel like Charles is probably not in the best spot in the world, where even though he is part of the majority during these early rounds, he's probably one of the few people here that we don't see in a solid alliance, where it feels like everyone else left on the Titans tribe either has like some sort of relationship or is part of some sort of alliance. I feel like for now, Charles is kind of just there. And I do worry that if they go to another tribal, he could be in some danger to that regard, unless there's some other relationship that the show just simply won't bring up because he's not very important and he probably won't win the game regardless. So I feel like all in all, it's looking like a pretty bad situation for Charles there. But again, he does also get to talk in the intro about being a lawyer and that he's like a titan and that he'll dominate, even though he doesn't seem to be dominating right now. So again, it is kind of a hairy spot for Charles right now. But again, I feel like he did leave more of an impression during the intro than a lot of other players, even though I feel like his position isn't nearly as strong as the show makes it seem. So because of that, I do have him here at number 10. Now moving on to number 9, and we also have someone not in the best spot right now, but I feel like this person got propped up a little more in the edit. But at number 9, we do have Sarah. And I did wonder if Sarah's too high here, as obviously her group is down the numbers. She was shown me part of this group that was blindsided against her in the first round. But I feel like out of those people, I feel like Sarah's probably the most well-developed in my eyes. Where obviously we did get her intro package in episode 2, talking about like how she's a firefighter. Her relationship with Tobias does seem to be important, even though we've seen almost nothing from Tobias himself. Again, I feel like there's more pros I can point to with Sarah's edit up to this point compared to a lot of other people. And while she could easily be a boot not too long from now, considering her bad position, I think she has more of a shot at surviving compared to a lot of other people in her group. So I have her here number 9. Now moving on to number 8, and I wasn't expecting this person to be this high, but given the rest of the field, I do have Wina here at number 8. And again, I don't think Wina's a particularly likely winner per se, as I feel like a lot of his content here is pretty circumstantial, where he was pretty quiet in the premiere, got nothing there. The bulk of his content comes in episode 2, but even that is circumstantial, as obviously he ends up finding an idol there, and obviously a lot of his content is revolved around that. He does get his intro package, talking about being a TikToker and a competitive eater, and that he likes to excel at all aspects of his life. And he does also have his relationship with Jaden, so that's something. Again, we'll definitely have to see more about Wina in the future, but for now, I just don't feel that great about him, considering how circumstantial his content is, but considering that he did technically get one of the bigger edits of the week, then also he does seem to be in an okay spot on his tribe, was enough to have him here number 8. Now moving on to number 7, and we probably have the person with the biggest edit overall this week, and I'm sure some people will have this person towards the top of the list. However, I feel like I have some reservations with having this person higher. But number 7, we do have Eden. And obviously Eden got a lot to do this week, where first up he got his intro package talking about how he's a Titan because he knows a lot about pop culture and that will allow him to connect with people, and he's all about relationships. Moving forward, we see him being the one to execute the Frankie blindside by getting all the people together, and we have his relationship with Mark and that the two of them seem to be this duo. We have them talking about them being the ones who are running the tribe, but they're letting Jessica do so. But at the same time, this plan nearly backfires as Jessica ends up throwing out his name versus someone else's. And we really see Eden kind of unravel here, where Mark says first that he doesn't want Eden to know that his name's out there because Eden will get paranoid, only for Eden to find out about the plan, and sure enough, he gets paranoid. So I feel like that's a pretty big worry sign for me, as even though Eden does survive this round, I feel like we're seeing him being this big character more so than someone who's a serious contender. And obviously Australian Survivor's different from Survivor US in that sometimes big characters can do well, but I feel like for Eden, he's reminding me a lot of Jordy from Blood vs. Water and Heroes vs. Villains, where even though he's getting a lot of content, I feel like it's going to lead to a downfall down the road, where I feel like he's getting a lot of content now, but eventually he's going to have some issues with his paranoia, or people are going to recognize that he's too big of a player. So I feel like that's a pretty big worry sign for me, and a big reason why I do have him lower. But again, he does seem to be doing well right now, and plus he has been getting one of the bigger edits out of the people here, which is why he's here at number 7. Now moving on to number 6, and really these next two players are not people I feel that great about either, but by virtue of this being Australian Survivor and a lot of people having big holes, I do have to put them somewhere. By number 6, we do have Garrick. And I feel like Garrick is probably on his way to getting his best case scenario here, where I feel like early on, he's someone who will either be a very early boot or someone who gets dragged deep into the game. And right now, he does seem to be in a good spot where obviously he's shown being pretty close to Kirby and Ferris. And I feel like that 3 could be a pretty tight duo moving forward. So I feel like that's pretty good. But beyond that, he does get some content, like in the premiere. He talks about how being a loss prevention officer makes him a rebel because the shoplifters are the Titans, which I found that pretty funny. In episode 3, he's able to suss out that people were throwing the challenge. He explains that in a confessional. So again, there are plenty of positives with Garrick's edit. Now at the end of the day, I don't see him as a super likely winner just due to his archetype, but I feel like he got enough decent content here to where I could see him making a relatively deep run, which is why he's here at number 6. Now moving on to number 5, and again, I'm not entirely sure what to do with this person either, but I feel like this person could have a shot, and here we have Valeria. And again, I feel like Valeria didn't get a massive edit here. You know, she does get a bit of content in the premiere talking about how if you smile, people assume you're an idiot, and that she likes to play dumb, and that she's a sleeping bear ready to fight. And she does also get some confessionals during the premiere as well. She also gets to establish her relationship with Viola that I feel like will be important moving forward. Now beyond that, she doesn't get much to do in episodes 2 or 3, but I feel like she got enough solid content from her premiere to where I do have her here at number 5. Now moving on to number 4, we have someone who I just mentioned, and here we have Viola. And I feel like Viola's edit has been largely similar to Valeria's, where she obviously got a pretty big segment during the intro talking about how like she came from South Sudan and that people from her culture weren't expected to do much, only for her to become a power lifter. She's not an average girl, but a queen. And even beyond that, she talks about like her relationship with Valeria, how they seem to be a tight duo. And again, she does seem to be in a solid spot on her tribe for the time being. And obviously, while that duo could be broken up sooner rather than later, I do feel like that will be an important relationship down the road. And while she doesn't get much to do in episodes 2 or 3, I feel like she probably will become more relevant later on, which is why I have her here at number 4. Now moving on to number 3, and I wasn't expecting this to be my top 3 coming into it, but I feel like after looking at everyone else, I mean, they kind of fit. But number 3, we do have Ferris. And Ferris is proving to be a pretty big character here. Probably not as big as Eden from these first 3 episodes, but he did get a pretty solid premiere talking about how people confuse him for being a big dumb Arab when he's a Venus, and he wants to avenge George and wants to take it home for him. And beyond that, he does get some pretty funny content talking about how bad the conditions are. But again, he is shown to be a pretty likable character here. Episode 2 is pretty quiet, but then in episode 3 is where we do see more of him, where he ends up explaining that he wants to take out Peta, and he ends up getting his way by the end of it. You also have him being part of a solid group with Kirby and Garrick. Again, all that's pretty good. I feel like Ferris is clearly being set up to be a major character across the season, which is a big reason why I have him this high. Though at the same time, I feel like right now it's still a bit unclear over who exactly is going to be the top contender by the end of it. But for now, I do have him here at number 3. Now moving on to number 2, and it's kind of funny that I had this person high considering how low I had them last week. But number 2, we do have Mark. And I feel a little weird about having Mark this high as well, as even though we got a pretty solid edit during this week, I am kind of questioning how sustainable that's going to be moving forward, as obviously he is shown being part of this pair with Eden, and I think he's clearly meant to be the more level-headed and rational player of those two. But even beyond that, he does a pretty good job at outlining the tri-dynamics. In general, I feel like he's definitely someone who will stand out to me. But at the same time, I also worry if Eden will lead to his downfall down the road, or maybe Eden's paranoia could lead to him like being taken out sooner rather than later. You also have him like sort of getting worried when he says that Eden's going to get paranoid when he finds out about the plan in episode 2, only for Eden to find out about the plan and obviously that to exactly happen. So again, that is a bit of a worry for me. But again, I feel like compared to everyone else, I feel like I have less complaints with Mark's edit up to this point than a lot of those other people. So I have him here at number 2. And now, at number 1, the person I believe is the most likely to win Australian Survivor Titans vs Rebels after week 1 is Kirby. And I feel a little weird about having Kirby at number 1, considering that her premiere was pretty quiet. In fact, her first 2 episodes were pretty quiet. It's really not until that 3rd episode that she really pops off, where obviously she does get the bulk of the credit for taking out Peta here. She obviously gets her intro package there, and she does clearly get to establish her alliances right then and there. And again, I feel like the fact that she was so quiet early on is a big worry in my eyes, though at the same time she does explain her strategy, saying that her plan is to lay low for the time being, like building relationships that way until she can find out how to strike. And I feel like we very well see that in action during this episode. So I feel like that's a bit of a consistent through line with these episodes that makes Kirby's lack of content in the premiere a bit more forgivable in my eyes. Now, am I saying she is the runaway frontrunner at the time being? I don't think so. I feel like we need to see more from her in the episodes to come to really solidify that. But I feel like compared to everyone else, I feel like I have less complaints with Kirby's edit than even Mark's in my eyes. So I feel like those things were enough to have her at the top spot for this week, so I have her here at number 1. And there we go, that'll do it for this week's video. If you like this content, be sure to like and subscribe, really helps with the channel. And I'll be back again next week to update the power rankings again, so you can look forward to that. I am still covering The Traitors US Season 2, so you can expect weekly power rankings of that show, along with other shows as they come up. I am on Patreon, so if you want to consider supporting the channel, you can do so by clicking the link in the description, and you can also join the Discord server by also clicking the link in the description. There's a lot of stuff coming your way, but for now, that is the video. See ya.